welcome back to the Swimming Construct 3 tutorial. In the last video, we got our project set up and also set up some custom controls. So while we're here in the event sheet, just right click anywhere in this open space and add group. I'm going to call this states, and I'm going to control click all three of those, make sure they're all highlighted, and just click and drag into this group. Okay, let's go back over to our layout. And I am going to double click and create a new sprite and resize it to, let's say, 16 by 16. And I'll zoom in a little. I'm going to put the origin in the bottom left. Make sure our bounding box is covering the whole sprite. And then with our paint bucket tool, I'm going to pick a nice little blue color. And I'll come down here in my HSL tab, just kind of change a few of these things. I'm going to do something like that. Kind of an aqua water looking color. Do yours how you want. Let's exit out of that. With that selected, I'm going to rename this to water. And I'm going to just kind of set us up a little level. So I'm going to move our ground sprite to something like that. And you can control click and drag out copies. And I'm going to make this water cover a decent area. So something like that. Maybe lift our ground up just a little. I'm just eyeballing all of this. Move our player out of the way. You can certainly make yours however you wish. Maybe like that. So we're going to need walls also. I'm going to drag out a couple more copies here. I'm going to make this wall off of the layout so we can go to the side of the screen, but we don't have to see our ground object as a wall. And I'll do the same. I'll control click, drag out a copy to the other side. I'm going to control click, drag out another copy down here. And then we can just click on these and drag them to the bottom like that. Actually, I'm going to drag it all the way off of the screen. Same with that. Same with that. So for our water, I don't want it to be level with our ground, but if I come down, we have snapping turned on, so it's 16 pixels. I think that's too low. I'm going to click on the layout and change our grid size to 8,8 and just drag it up one 8-pixel step. So something like that. Let's go ahead and save while we're thinking about it. Okay, let's go over to the event sheet and let's set up some controls for our water state. So the way we're going to define what state our player is in is through a variable inside the player object. So click on our player in the project panel, and over here in the properties, edit instance variables. Let's add a new instance variable, and I'm going to rename this state. And this is going to determine what state we're in, and that type is going to be a string, and we'll leave everything else. Hit OK. So we're going to set up two different states. One state is going to be when our player is swimming, and the other one will be when our player is not swimming or on land. So I'm going to add an event to our states group and grab our player and go down to is overlapping another object, and we'll choose the water object, and we can add an action to that and go into our player, and let's get our set value, and that's our state variable. And in between quotation marks, I'm just going to call this swim. Okay, I'm going to try to make this a little bigger just in case anybody has trouble seeing this on screen. So as long as we're overlapping the water object, we know we're in the swim state. But when we're not overlapping the water object, I don't want to be in our swim state anymore. So we need to change that to a different state. If we highlight this entire block of code, hit X on the keyboard, it gives us an else statement. And this just means any other time that we're not in the water, we can change the state. So let's add an action, get our player scroll down to set value, our state instance variable, and I'll just call this land. Okay, let's come down here to add event. This is adding an event outside of our states group. And I'm going to go into our player and come down here to compare instance variable. And there's our state instance variable. When it is equal to, let's set up swim. And then with this whole block highlighted, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And we can go into this event and change swim to land. So up here, we're calling for these instance variables and changing our state. So we set up the behaviors for our player character over here in the platform behavior, but we're not going to need these. I just did that so we could test. So let's set up our land. This is our default controls. Add an action, go into our player. Let's scroll down to our platform behavior, and I'm going to set max speed. We had it 200 over here. I'm going to slow it down. Let's go 180. Let's come up here to swim and add an action to it. Go into our player, scroll down to set max speed. And I want this really low because we're in water. So I'm going to go with 30. And we can actually test this out. Right now we have our normal controls. When I get into the water, you can't see me. Let's go over to our layout, and I'm going to right click on our water object and go to Z order, send to bottom layer. Okay, let's try this again. Now I'm moving really slow because I'm in the water. My jump is still the same. We haven't changed that. Okay, back on the event sheet. Down here in our land state, let's add another action. Go into our player, scroll down to set acceleration. This is how long it takes our player to get up to max speed. When we are on land, I want it immediate. So I'm just going to type in 1,000. But for swim, I want it to take a little bit longer. So in our swim state, let's add an action. Go into player, scroll down to set acceleration. And I'm going to change this to 400. And then for our land state, I'm going to add another action. Get our player, scroll down to set deceleration. And for land, I'm going to go with 1500. And do the same thing up here with swim. Let's add an action. Player, set deceleration. And I'm going to set this to 400 as well. So when we stop pressing a direction and leave it idle, our player is going to slowly come to a stop. Whereas on land, as soon as we stop pressing a direction, he'll come to an immediate stop. Let's add another action to our land state. Get our player, scroll down to max fall speed. That's set max fall speed. And I believe we had that at 1,000. So anytime we jump, he's going to start falling down at the same speed that he jumped up in. Okay, up here on swim, let's add an action, get our player, scroll down to set max fall speed. And I'm going to change that to 30. Really slow falling when we're not on the ground. Okay, I want our jump to only be accessed when we are on land. So I am going to drag this whole block of code down and indent it. Just move my mouse over until this line indents. And that makes it a sub-event of this land check. Now, when we're in the swim state, I won't be able to jump with the W key. Let's test all this out. Okay, I have full control. My jump still works. We're moving. We get in the water. I have that slow fall, that slow max fall speed, and my left and right moves me really slow, and the W key does nothing. Okay, let's give us an option to jump while we're in water. With our swim state highlighted, press B on the keyboard, and that gives us a blank sub-event. Just like the jump is only accessible when we're in the land state, now only when we're in the swim state can we access this. So let's double click on this and go to our keyboard and get on key pressed. Let's choose the W key. Okay, Jump only will work when that sprite is touching a floor. So if our guy is here, he can jump as long as he's touching the ground. If he's in water, he won't be able to jump upwards unless he's all the way on the ground. But I want him to be able to use the W key to swim upwards or to thrust upwards no matter where he is. Therefore, we can't use the jump behavior inside the water. So let's add an action to this on W pressed, go into our player, and we want our vector Y. This is our up and down motion on the screen. For the value, if you add a positive number, the vector Y moves from the top of the screen down. As you move down, that number increases. As you move up, the number decreases. So to jump up, we're going to have to decrease the value. So that'll be a negative, and I'm going to go to 60 because our jump strength on land is 400. So in water, I want it to not be as strong. Okay, let's play this. All right. We have controls, and when we're in the water, working pretty good. We can jump even if we're not touching the ground. And once we're on land, we have our land controls back. Okay, let's get organized just a little bit. I'm going to right-click in a blank space and add a group. I will call this land, and I'm going to do it again. Create another group, and I'll call this water. And I'm going to take my whole land event here and slide it into this land group, and I'll close it up. And I'll do the same thing with swim into the water group. You can name these groups whatever you want. That part doesn't really matter. We just want some organization here. Okay, let's make sure we're saving. And let's go back up to our states group. And I want to get our animation straightened out. So if our A is down, that means we're facing to the left. And D is down, we're moving and facing to the right. So with A is down, if we go into our player, we're facing to the right by default. So in A, let's add an action, go to our player, and we want to mirror that. So set mirrored to mirrored. That will reverse the sprite. And then do the same thing down here in D, add action, go into our player, and I'm going to type in mirror, set mirrored, and this is going to be not mirrored. So if we play that, he now faces the right direction wherever we go. Okay? Okay, now for the actual animations, I'm going to put those in our state calls. So for overlapping water, this is when we're swimming. Otherwise, we're not swimming. So everything I want to happen outside of the water, I'm going to put underneath this else statement. So with that block highlighted, I'm going to press B on the keyboard. That gives me a blank sub-event. If we go to our layout, we can kind of visualize this. We have our different animations of idle, jump, and run. Those are going to be our land animations. So if we want to say jump, the only time we're going to be able to jump is when we're on the floor. Because if I'm in the water and I jump out of the water, my state changes to land. And if my guy is in the air over the water, I want him to have that same jump animation. So anytime he is not on the floor while he is in the land state, which is this else statement set to land, I want him to have that jump animation. So in this blank sub-event, I'm going to double click to go into it, go into our player, and scroll down to our platform behaviors, and I want to check for is on floor. And with this highlighted like this, press I on the keyboard and it puts that X there. That means if it's not on the floor, then I want to add that action, go into our player, set animation, and in between quotation marks, I'm going to put jump. If I play this, anytime that I am in the air, well, actually, we called for jump. We just didn't tell it to change animations after that. If we click on our else statement, it highlights everything, even the sub-events under it. We can press B on the keyboard again, gives us a new blank sub-event. And I'm going to check for our left and right controls. because if these keys are down, that means we are moving. And I want to play the run animation when we're moving. But I don't want to play run animation while we're in the water, so this will only be played when we're in our land state. So in this blank sub event, let's double click, go get our keyboard and say key is down, and we're going to check for that A. And then with just this event highlighted, not the block, but just the event, if we Control C to copy, Control V to paste, now we have both of these in the same event. I'm going to go into the second one and change that A to a D. Now it says A and D are down. We can run some code. But I don't want to check if both keys are down. I want to check if A or D is down. So we can right click on it and make OR block. And it puts that OR in there. So A or D is down. Let's add an action, go into our player, set the animation. In quotation marks, we want the run animation. So now we have told it to play the jump animation, play the run animation, but we can have a little more control over this by making sure that we are on the floor instead of not on the floor. So I'm going to highlight this else statement and press B on the keyboard to add another sub-event. And I'm going to double click, go into it, grab our player, scroll down to is on floor. And this time I want to know if it is on the floor. And I'm going to highlight and click and drag this whole block of code underneath our platform is on floor, and then indent it so that it becomes a sub-event of platform is on floor. So now that we have this check, we can say A or D is down, we can run that run animation. Otherwise, if we're on the floor and A and D is not down, then we can play the idle animation. So let's click on this block of code, this A or D is down check, and press X on the keyboard. That gives us an else statement. This says A or D is down, play run, otherwise play idle. So add an action, player, set animation to idle. Okay, let's test that. So there we go. We run, it sets it back to idle. We jump, back to idle. Looking good. And then when we jump in the water, we're set to the last animation that was called, because now we're in the swim state. And when we are in the swim state up here, we aren't telling it to do anything other than change the state to swim in our water group down here. This code takes place. So no animations are being called. So we can change that real easily in this event right here. When we are overlapping the water, I want our swim animation to play. So let's add an action to that, go into our player, and let's set the animation to swim. Let's play that. And there he goes. Now he's swimming. No matter where we go or what happens. And if we jump out of the water, he jumps. You see him in that jump animation real quick. And then when we're back on land, we have our land controls back. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and save that. Okay, before we get out of this video, I want to do a little bit of code cleanup, because instead of using the W to simulate jump, I'm going to do the same thing we did for our water group down here, where we use W for the vector. So I'm going to change this to a Y vector as well. And I'm going to achieve that by making each one of these events call for a single variable, and then we'll change that variable in these blocks of code. So if we go to our player object and come down here in the properties to edit instance variables, let's add a new one. And I'm just going to call this jump, and it's going to be a number. Okay. Come down here and delete both of these sub-events. We are going to call for these controls up here in these events. So in is overlapping water event, I'm going to highlight that block of code, press B on the keyboard, gives us a blank sub-event, and double click to go into it, get our keyboard and on key pressed, and that is going to be the W for me. And then we can add an action, go into our player, scroll down to the platform behavior, set vector y, and that is going to be our instance variable. So we need to call for this instance variable here. Grab our player object, player dot, and it was jump. Player dot jump. And then down here in our else statement, I want to do the same thing, but I only want to be able to call for this vector y when we are on the floor. Because if we call for it outside of this check, every time we press the W key, it's just going to keep jumping up and never come down unless we stop pressing the key. So I only want to be able to jump when the platform is on the floor. With that block of code highlighted, B on the keyboard, and double click to go into our new sub event, get our keyboard on key pressed, and that is going to be a W. And I'm going to click on this far left side to highlight this whole block and click and drag it up to be the first check underneath platform is on floor. So in this check, we can add an action, go get our player, scroll down to set vector y, and same thing here, player dot jump. So right now, these won't do anything because we have not established what player dot jump is. By default, it is 0. So it won't do anything. I'll play it. We can move. W does nothing. Same thing down here. Okay. Down here in our land and water groups, I am going to establish that variable. So add an action to land, go into our player, scroll down to set value. Jump is the instance variable we want. And remember, going up is a negative value on the y-axis, so negative, and I think we had that at 400 for the jump strength. And then down here in our water group, let's add an action. Player, scroll down to set value. Jump is negative to 60. Let's play this. All right, we can jump. Our animations are playing correctly. We get in the water. Everything is working exactly how we told it to. Let's see if we can get out of the water. Good deal. All right. Looking good. You can skip across the water. Okay. In the next video, we are going to start working on some effects. As for this video, we have completed the mechanic. This is all it takes for a land and swim mechanic and how to change in between the two. From here on out, we will be having to work in the paid version, the full version of Construct 3, because we are going to change quite a few things that the free version will not be able to do. However, if you do not have a subscription to Construct 3, I encourage you to at least look through some of the following videos to see how we're doing things. You never know what you might pick up on or learn in the process. This is going to do it for this video. I'll explain all that and more in the next video. Don't forget to save, and I will see you then.